The Russian newspaper Izvestia is reporting that Moscow is planning to send crude oil and fuel to Cuba. The country is suffering its worst energy crisis for years after the US choked off its oil supplies. Cuba had long relied on its ally, Venezuela, for fuel, but those supplies dried up after the US abducted the country's president, Nicolas Maduro. Like many countries, Russia is evacuating its tourists from the island and suspending all flights there because of a lack of aviation fuel. Canadian airlines also suspended flights this week, and Cuba has warned international carriers that jet fuel will no longer be available. Well, the Kremlin has declined to comment on those reports of the imminent dispatch of fuel to Cuba, but Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov did confirm that Moscow is talking to Havana about ways to help.
It's clear that it's impossible to discuss these issues at the moment in such a public manner, for obvious reasons. But I can only reiterate that we've been talking at various levels for days. We're in contact with our Cuban friends, and we're discussing options for providing them with assistance.
Ricardo Torres Pérez is an economist and research fellow at American University's Center for Latin American and Latino Studies. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. Let's start with the situation in Cuba, where the UN is warning of a possible humanitarian collapse. What is the situation there day to day?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Power outages have been an issue in Cuba for a while already. And with this new situation unfolding, that will only get worse. And that translates into people's ability to, move around for those who have electric vehicles, but also cooking and the like. Then transport, since fuel is very scarce, it's been scaled down, meaning people's ability to move around, to gather stuff, to buy what they need for their daily needs is compromised. And I'm thinking about the elderly, for instance, their ability to walk long distances to gather food or other products. It's getting very, very difficult. And I guess, the situation as days pass, it will get worse. Reality is that without inputs of significant amount, Cuba eventually will run out of energy, and you need electricity or fuel for essentially anything that you want to engage with in the economy and society.
And so how dangerous, then, is this moment for Cuba's government? Can they just blame it on Americans? Will that be enough for them to deflect the damage from this?
Right. As I said, the energy crisis was already part of daily life in Cuba. U.S. actions in 2026, of course, they've exacerbated that situation. It's a very difficult moment for the Cuban government, I believe. On the one hand, they have an economy that is sinking, that has been in recession for years, that is not doing well, and people feel it. On the other hand, they see their support, overseas support, like winding down. Venezuela is effectively out of the equation, not getting any oil from Venezuela. And there is always a question mark about Russia and China. So far, mostly declarations, but concrete actions, support in terms of money, resources, or oil itself was not on the table.
Right. But now we have these reports in the Russian media that Russia is planning to send fuel. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting development. Frankly speaking, from the Cuban side, my understanding is that people were expecting more support from overseas. And I guess that all eyes were in Russia because they have a material capacity. Russia is a big oil producer and exporter, and China because it's a super big economy and it has plenty of resources. The wording that I've heard, they're trying to walk a fine line. They're framing an oil shipment as humanitarian aid, but at the same time, they're saying that they don't want to escalate any situation with the United States. let's remind that Washington and Moscow, they just agreed to reestablish high-level military-to-military dialogue, which was suspended in 2021. And I guess Ukraine and the war in Ukraine is the priority for Russia. So they're definitely walking a very fine line here.
OK, so because that would be quite a bold move for Russia to confront the US so clearly in its backyard there in Cuba. So let's continue this thought experiment then. If Russia did send fuel to Cuba as a humanitarian gesture or whatever, however it's packaged, what sort of response would you expect from Donald Trump, from the United States? Bearing in mind, of course, that Cuba is just a couple of days sailing from Venezuela, where the US already has a significant military presence.
Yeah, that's. I think it's a risky situation. We know that this White House is quite unpredictable. What I can say is about the United States, what they've shown so far is that they are determined to move ahead with pressure, a step of pressure on Cuba. For Russia, that's what I mentioned, that they're framing this potential shipment as humanitarian aid.
Right.
And I think they're only gonna do it if they don't see important troubles coming from the United States. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to happen.
All right, Cuba's not worth it for them. People are talking about this Cuba strategy, America's Cuba strategy, as being driven by Donald Trump's Cuban-American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Do you think either of them has an end game in mind? And if so, what is it?
Right. I mean, it's pretty clear, obvious. For Marco Rubio, Cuba, it's beyond politics and diplomacy. Cuba is a personal issue. He grew up in Florida, in South Florida, and became a politician in Florida as well. So that's it means that Cuba is very important for him and the people around him. In terms of the end game in Cuba, they may frame it in different ways, but I think the statements are clear. Whether a negotiation, with someone from the elite in Cuba, or some more radical action, what they want to see is effectively a regime change in Cuba. That could be gradual. We've seen what's going on in Venezuela, but I think that's the end game, because in Cuba, it's not even a discussion about a natural resource that is critical for the United States or for the world, for that matter. Right. That's not the case in Cuba. So the big change, the big price in Cuba will be to effectively change the current system.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Ricardo Torres Pérez from American University.
Thank you.